What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another Angle of Pursuit podcast, your fantasy football home over at fakepigskin.com. I'm your host, Kyle Robert. You can follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. With me tonight from the East Coast, it's Damian Dabrowski. What's up, Damian?
Not much, Kyle. Preseason's in the background right now, so we know it's time for football. Usually, I think everybody kind of waits for the Hall of Fame to kick things off, but Hard Knocks last night. That's what I use. When Hard Knocks starts, that's when you really know you're in football season.
Yeah, it's officially hard. It's officially or football season when HBO starts the show Hard Knocks and the teams are out there running around and all that good stuff. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. We actually have. I mean, the Hall of Fame game is a pseudo preseason game. It's like a preseason game. But tonight we have a real preseason game. Hey Alex, when you're let me introduce him first. Let me introduce our guest from NFL Media. You hear him on a podcast. You read his work over at NFL.com. It's Alex Gelhar. What's up, Alex?
Not too much, guys. Thanks for having me. I'm actually sitting in my producer chair for the NFL Fantasy Live podcast, trying to keep tabs on this preseason game while we do this as well.
There you go. Now, when you're watching preseason football, are there certain things you're looking for? Are you trying to target? Oh, I want to watch these players perform. I want to watch, see the connection the receiver may have with a new quarterback, that kind of stuff. I mean, what are you looking for when you're watching preseason football, and in terms of how you're going to apply that to fantasy?
I mean, most of these games, especially the early ones, aren't too informative. It's a good chance to see rookies, though. Like, we got a good look at Christian McCaffrey so far tonight, and Deshaun Watson as well. And there'll be some other guys we'll want to keep an eye on in the future, just to see. Especially, well, I say rookies too, because a lot of rookie running backs will get run, and it's a good chance in the preseason to just get a look at how a guy's seeing the field and how he's moving, if he's quick, if he's running with power and stuff. This is the place where we saw Mark Ingram a couple of years ago look really great before he broke out. Terrence West looked good in the preseason last year before he got a good chance to assume that role. And Rob Kelly actually was playing really well in the preseason. And I was talking him up a little bit last year, and I got laughed at. And then lo and behold, he laughed at by my coworkers here. And then lo and behold, he was the starting running back down the stretch. So
but
it's a great chance to watch running backs. Wide receivers and stuff is not quite as informative, but it's still not bad to see how they're connecting with quarterbacks.
But Matt Jones has all those measurables. Surely he's going to be the starting running back in Washington.
I mean, when his biggest measurable is dropping the football, it's hard to keep your job.
Yeah, for sure. And Rob Kelly's one that sticks out for me, too. I remember, that was a very muddled backfield last year, and I was looking for somebody who could actually emerge. And I was like, oh, this Kelly guy might have legs. And sure enough, I mean, he's a little more of a plotter than probably people really like, but he became a fantasy asset and a guy that helped people win games, and that's kind of what you're looking for. Damian, what about you? What are you looking for when you watch preseason stuff?
I think it's just a great chance to see, especially for guys I think that are coming out of college and maybe they didn't play at a big a Power 5 conference or a big name school, and there's a lot of questions about are their numbers going to translate? Can we actually take what they did in college when they weren't playing against great competition? And obviously, the guys you see in the first week of the preseason aren't, they're not going to, the majority of them are not going to be NFL starters, but they're still, better athletes than you see in college. So I always like to see kind of how those players with those question marks kind of look. And same thing for guys, that maybe did really well even at big time programs, but had poor combines. And, now people are worried about, because of their measurables, because of their 40 time, because of their, shuttle, things like that. They're worried if they're going to have the quickness or the athleticism to play at the next level. And I just think it's a good time to kind of see how they look, not just in shorts and shoulder pads, but actually, going full speed on the field against some of the best athletes in the world.
Yeah. You also don't want to fall for a one-play guy like an Ameer Abdullah a couple of years ago. I remember had one spin and everybody, go shoot him up your draft boards. Draft him 6 rounds sooner than you would have. So you got to be watching out. Obviously, it's a good litmus test, but you don't also want to go too far and completely change your draft boards based upon 15 minutes of actual game time. But tonight we are going to talk some NFC North, the Bears, the Lions, the Packers, the Vikings. Make sure we get all your hard-hitting questions in there. Make sure we cover all these teams from top to bottom and get as much in as we possibly can. And let's start in Chicago with the Bears. and their biggest fantasy asset, Jordan Howard. Alex, how do you see Jordan Howard kind of shaking out? Like, obviously last year was a welcome to the NFL, 1,300 yards, big fantasy season. In year two, are you buying another year from Jordan Howard, or you think maybe we got a little bit of regression coming?
Well, I think he's a fantastic player, and he proved that last year that he can play at any level. He succeeded at University of Alabama Birmingham. He succeeded at Indiana after that first program folded. Now he succeeded as a rookie, but I think a lot of the factors around Jordan Howard could conspire against him and kind of limit his success. He had only, I think, 6 or 7 touchdowns on the ground last year, 6, I think, on the ground and 7 total. 3 of them came in one game, and it was that snow-drenched apocalypse against the 49ers where nobody could complete a pass, especially Colin Kaepernick. So this is an offense, as you mentioned, he's kind of their only fantasy asset. They've got Mike Glennon under center. They've got Cameron Meredith as their number 1 wide receiver. They signed Kendall Wright and Marcus Wheaton, but nobody's getting super excited about those guys. And then Kevin White is a gigantic question mark still, with I think fewer than 20 receptions in his first 2 pro seasons because of health issues. So there's not going to be a lot else going on in that offense, and it might really set Howard up for a difficult run of facing stacked boxes, getting hit behind the line. He was a decent pass catcher last year. He had a kind of a disproportionate number of catches considering he had 50 targets. I think he only caught 28 balls. But I'm worried about him because his draft price is so high. He's going as the 8th running back off the board right now, and that's just a little too rich for my blood.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you there. I also have concerns that, we could be looking at Todd Gurley 2.0. We could be looking at a guy, especially if Mitchell Trubisky ends up getting early starts. And, I mean, even Mike Glennon, like, we haven't really seen him have a ton of success in the NFL, starting for whoever he was on, the Bucs and all those. It will be interesting to see. I'm with you. Like, paying that price is very hard for me to do. Damian, what about for you? Is he a guy that you're considering taking kind of in that, late first, early second round range that he's currently going?
I'm certainly not targeting him, and to kind of the points that both of you guys made, I think, like you said, the talent is there. He's a great player, but a lot of times, that's not as important as opportunity. And I don't mean in the sense of, is he, because he's obviously the number 1 guy, but when you kind of look, I know there's a lot of kind of conversation going on, these past couple of weeks as we get into preseason about, different approaches going into your draft. And I've seen a lot of stuff about, people saying maybe you should just take, the worst 8 teams that you think are going to be in the league, or the worst 8 offenses, and just don't take any players on that team unless they're falling 2-3 rounds later than they should, just because they're not going to have the same chances that guys on good offenses do. And I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? You want a running back on a team that's going to get a lot of first down, that's going to have a lot of red zone opportunities. And Howard, even though he's the guy, he's certainly not going to be, just because of the quarterback issues we talked about, the receiver issues. There's some questions in the line. This Bears team, they're not the Patriots. Nobody's confusing them for that. So why kind of take a hit in terms of your first round pick where he's not going to have a chance at a 15 touchdown season the way a running back on a really good team might. So while the volume will be there, he's just going to have to be incredibly efficient in order to kind of have the same output as some of those other guys. So unless he's falling kind of towards the end of the second round, I probably won't have him on any teams.
Yeah, I'm 100% in agreement there. So Damian, if you're on the, you're looking at, middle of the second, let's say, you're on the clock. Jordan Howard or Melvin Gordon?
Gordon, easy.
Alex, same for you?
Gordon.
Yeah. What about DeMarco Murray or Jordan Howard, Alex?
Murray.
Same for you, Damian?
Yeah, it's closer, but I think the Titans are going to be in a much better position on offense this year.
Yeah, especially Marcus Mariota, baby. What about Jay, Damian? Are you taking him over Jordan Howard?
That's close, just because with Jay Cutler coming in now, I'd still take the Dolphins offense. So you still have the injury questions with Ajayi a little bit, and the fact that so much of his production came in a limited number of games. So I might take Howard there.
Yeah, I mean, Jay Cutler, the savior. Like, obviously, you gotta lean Jay there. You do have to worry about Pouncey, but I lean Ajayi. Alex, what about you?
Ajayi all the way for me there too.
Yeah. And then we were talking about him a little bit before the show. Devonta Freeman just got that huge payday. Alex, we got to go Devonta over Jordan Howard, right?
Absolutely.
Let's talk about those pass catchers and start with Cameron Meredith. This is a guy who, in terms of volume potential, should have a ton. Is this a guy that you're comfortable having, Alex, on your teams? You think he, has that 100 and something target potential and can be a guy that, even if he's a wide receiver 3 or a flex type option, can help, on a week-to-week basis?
Yeah, absolutely. A guy like Cameron Meredith, too, is a situation where you want to consider your roster construction when you get him. You don't actually want him to be one of your, week in, week out starters, but where he's going later in rounds, you can get him anywhere from round 8 to round 12 and beyond, depending on your league and how savvy the drafters are. But he should at least get close to 120 targets, if not more. He played well last year, both in the slot and when they moved him outside. He pretty much split pretty equally there between his stats. And I think he scored pretty well in Matt Harmon's reception perception. And especially when you're targeting wide receivers late, the biggest thing you want to get is volume, and he should have it there for sure with the unproven guys around him.
Yeah, and I think he, to your point, but depending on roster construction, if you want to take a little more risk early in your drafts, maybe take a gamble on Sammy Watkins and hope he's healthy, and then, add a Cam Meredith later in your draft to give you some safety. I think that's a really good way to go. Damian, what about you? Are you on board with Cam Meredith?
Yeah, I like the player. I think he showed a lot last year. Kind of a weird pedigree in the sense that, starting out as a quarterback and not even making the team, earlier in the season and then basically being their best receiver in the second half. There's definitely concern with, he's going to have to learn to play with a new quarterback here. Not that he really, had a great one last year, but like you guys said, I think the good thing is he doesn't really have a lot of competition. So if he can continue kind of what we saw towards the end of last season, there's a pretty good chance that he's going to be the number one weapon in this offense. But at the same time, he's obviously not going to have the consistency factor just because of the questions on this offense. So I think if you have, like you said, stability with some of your earlier picks, then he's certainly a guy you can take who should have pretty good upside.
Yeah, 100% in agreement. What about, Alex, if, obviously you're not drafting the Kevin Whites, the Kendall Wrights, the Marcus Wilsons, but are you kind of keeping an eye on anyone potentially to emerge and be a guy that maybe you add via the waiver wire in, I don't know, week 5, week 6?
From the Bears, maybe Zach Miller. I think he could certainly be a streaming tight end option. He was actually on pace last year before he got injured, and on pace stats are always wonky and not the greatest metric to judge things by, but he was on pace to finish, I think, as a top 12 tight end last year with the volume he was seeing there. And Mike Glennon, in one of his years, I think it was 2013 when he had those expanded starts, the tight end position was the second most targeted spot he threw to after Vincent Jackson. The following year when he had Vincent Jackson and Mike Evans, he split up more of his targets between those two, but he has a history of going to the position. Zach Miller's still pretty good. They brought in Deion Sims and they drafted Adam Shaheen. I don't think Shaheen's going to make an impact this year. So yeah. Miller's a guy to watch because he's been with the team for a little while. He knows what's going on with the system, and he was playing pretty well last year before he got injured.
Yeah, I like Miller a lot. Was definitely a guy when I remember having a nice run of big games. Obviously, super athletic. When he's healthy, can be a difference maker. A great name, if you're looking for an early week, bye week replacement type player. I'm with you on Shaheen. I like him for a long term, but it's just so hard for young tight ends to make an early impact. It's very rare even you get a Hunter Henry type season. Damian, what about you? Are you targeting?
Extremely rare.
Yeah. Damian, are you targeting Kevin White? Zach Miller? Anybody as potential guys you're kind of keeping on your watch list for early in the season?
Not necessarily in kind of your standard leagues, but I do think that if you're doing MFLs, if you're doing the best ball stuff, I do think it's worth taking a shot on Kevin White there, just because he's a weird player in that we've literally seen nothing from him, and he really only had that 1 year at West Virginia. But then you look at his combine, and you just showed you his numbers, you would think we're talking about Julio Jones in terms of his measurables. So it's kind of that thing where we might never see that translate into the player he is. But with how low the price is right now in those formats where you don't have to worry about trying to figure out when to play him and you can just get his best games, I think that's going to make a lot of sense. And just in general, I think the Bears are going to be a team that's going to be pretty popular in terms of DFS. I think if we see, what Mike Glennon looks like, we see kind of which guys he prefers. It might be tough to kind of get him in time to use in season long, but based on the fact that their prices are probably going to start off being pretty low, and if one or two guys gets injured and there's only a couple of receivers here, and it's easier to kind of see where the concentration of targets is going, I think there's going to be a lot of value here for DraftKings and FanDuel and all that.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. I could definitely see, especially Zach Miller being a cheap tight end that I target in good matchups. Let's head up to Detroit and talk about those Lions. We'll start with Matthew Stafford, a late-round quarterback that I'm really high on this year. I think has a lot of fantasy potential. Obviously, Marvin Jones, Golden Tate, Eric Ebron, all those good weapons to target. Alex, is Stafford a guy that if you're waiting on quarterback is interesting to you?
He certainly is interesting. I have some other guys that I target ahead of him when I'm waiting on quarterbacks, but if I'm left with Matt Stafford, I'm certainly not upset about it. He's really kind of improved his game a little bit under the tutelage of Jim Bob Cooter these last couple of years, still putting up good yardage numbers, cleaning up some of the interception problems that were bogging him down there in the middle of his career, and he's got good targets around him. So he's, like I said, he's not my first choice of late round quarterbacks, but I think I have him right now around like my QB 10 or 12. So I'm certainly, he's certainly in that back end of the quarterback one range for me in terms of the season long rankings right now.
Yeah, it's almost exactly where I have him. Throw out a couple names of guys that you would target when you're sitting there late, like Andy Dalton, Tyrod Taylor, those kind of guys.
Those are the two that are on the top of my mind all the time when I'm in those late rounds, especially now that Tyrod got Anquan Boldin. I mean, it's not the sexiest signing, but it gives him such a reliable presence in the red zone and a veteran, trustworthy target hog if Sammy Watkins goes down with an injury, as we know he can. So Sammy, Zay Jones, Boldin, Charles Clay, Shady McCoy, it's a good group of players around Tyrod. And, I mean, let's not forget he was a top 10 quarterback last year and just missed the cut 2 years ago when he missed a few games with the knee injury. And then Dalton, I think he's a great chance for a bounce back. Like, everybody got injured on his offense last year. His offensive line is a question mark right now, but, man, with John Ross coming in, A.J. Green there, healthy Tyler Eifert, all those backs, like, this could be a great bounce back season for Dalton, and he's just super cheap in drafts.
Yeah, I mean, I have a feeling that Dalton will be my quarterback in about 95% of leagues. Really high on him to all those points. I love that Dalton call. Damian, are you in on Stafford? Is he a guy that when you're waiting on quarterback, that if he's there, you'll take him?
No, I don't think I've ever owned Matt Stafford in all the years I've been playing fantasy, which hasn't necessarily been intentional in the past, but I just think he had that one great year, and since then I don't think he's really ever, in terms of fantasy, kind of become the quarterback that people expected. Mm-hmm. In terms of, I just feel like he's always the guy that you see a couple good games from him, you invest, it's like a great matchup. They're playing the Bears. It's supposed to be a shootout, and then you look and it's 13-10 in the fourth quarter, and he's got, one touchdown and 2 picks and 175 yards. I just, like, that's a recurring nightmare that I feel like happens every year. And he's definitely made strides in terms of efficiency and in terms of, being a real life quarterback. But I just don't think this offense has that. I don't think they have enough of a running game to basically have a balanced enough attack. And they don't have, while they have some good weapons, it's not like the Saints where, you have 5 or 6 guys that you can throw to on every play, and it doesn't even matter if you can run it or not. So I just think their ceiling is capped a little bit, and the fact that, he no longer has Calvin Johnson where he can just throw it up in double coverage and get a 50-yard touchdown. I just don't think we're going to have that ceiling. And I'm totally on board with, the 2 names you guys threw out there in Dalton and Tyrod that I would take over him. Obviously Dak and Phillip Rivers, I think, are in that range too, and I prefer those 2. So I'm not, I'm probably not going to have Stafford unless he kind of falls even further into kind of that like Carson Palmer, Blake Bortles, Carson Wentz territory.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I'd probably take Phil Rivers. I'd probably take Stafford over Dak, but yeah, I mean that's kind of that range where I'm probably going to be happy with most of those guys that you named off as my starter. Let's talk about the running game in Detroit. And Alex, Ameer Abdullah is a guy who seems to be gaining a little bit of steam, obviously, in his first 2 seasons between injuries and fumbles and just not being super productive. He kind of hasn't lived up to the excitement of his preseason run. As a guy going in, middle to the end of the 5th round, do you think, Ameer Abdullah can put it together in his third season? And I guess, is he a guy that you'd be comfortable targeting kind of in that range?
Well, Ameer Abdullah is a case too where, like I said earlier, it kind of depends on your roster construction because the upside is certainly there. We know he's super talented. His measurables and combine numbers were off the charts. We've seen it in the preseason and the regular season. Let's not forget, I think he juked Eric Weddle out of San Diego basically that rookie year in week 1. But this is a case where, like, if I'm drafting wide receiver heavy early, for example, at the start of the game, and then I'm looking to get a bunch of potential RB1s in that range, like in the Ameer Abdullah, C.J. Anderson, Paul Perkins, guys who might be in committees, but if everything fell right, could have a ton of upside. That's when I might be more prone to drafting Ameer Abdullah. I'm a big fan of his. I was when he was coming out of college. I still believe in him, so I'll probably be, chasing that tail around the park or whatever expression you want to use for a while. But I think he certainly can have value in that offense.
Yeah, I'm with you there in terms of that strategy. I tend to lean, basically my first 3 picks are going to be stud wide receivers, and then I'm going to take my shots. First, I guess, would you be comfortable taking him in the 4th round, or would you have to wait until the 5th before you start seriously considering him?
I might even wait beyond the 5th, to be honest.
Okay.
I don't know if I'd feel great about him there, but I'd have to see how the draft board unfolded.
Yeah, and then do you think he could kind of, I took Melvin Gordon in a similar range a year ago, and obviously he exploded. Do you think he kind of has that potential if everything falls right for him?
Yeah, absolutely. He's super talented. He's got home run speed. He can catch balls out of the backfield too. And they were throwing to him and Theo Riddick. I know we'll get to him in a second back in the day. So there's certainly, the volume could be there. It just you have no idea right now if things are going to break right, unfortunately.
Yeah. Damian, what about you? Where are you at with Ameer?
I love him. But with him, my concern is we talked about this on the last pod, kind of what I said about Duke Johnson, where he's one of those guys where I don't quite understand like their transition to the NFL in terms of what the team that drafted them is doing. I said with Duke Johnson how the guy's basically the greatest rusher at the university that's produced more, NFL running backs than anybody else, and then he gets to the NFL and he gets relegated to being a 3rd down back basically from his first season in the league. And I think that's kind of what's happening with Abdullah. I know they keep saying they want to give him more work, and injuries have obviously prevented us from kind of seeing that. But it just feels like with Riddick there, he's never going to, have that pass-catching upside. Maybe he'll catch 30, 35 passes, but I don't think he's ever going to have that, 50, 60 catch season that you hope for from a stud running back. And at the same time, they keep bringing in these terrible guys to basically be their goal line runners, whether it's Joik Bell or Dwayne Washington or just, George Wynn, players that nobody's ever heard of before to basically just run into the line, 3 times and then kick a 19-yard field goal. So I don't know if the upside on Abdullah is as high as we really want it to be, or as high as it should be, given how talented he is.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be watching him this preseason to see how he looks, to see how the coaches are using him. Hopefully he does get, a bulk of that work, because I think, to your point, if he's getting taken out on short yardage plays, goal line plays, and then here comes Theo Riddick on a lot of 3rd downs, his upside is definitely very capped. Alex, what about Theo Riddick?
I will say, though, real quick,
yeah.
Can I jump in one quick thing on Abdullah?
Sure.
I think that's a valid point that he could get taken out for these guys in short yardage situations. But honestly, and this is part of the risk with him, he's been out so much, we don't even know how much they might use him in those situations, because the talent disparity, and he's not like he's a small guy, he's a little shorter back, but he's big. But are they really going to want to bring in a Dwayne Washington or a Zach Zenner, or to borrow Frank from Adam Rank, some other mid-card jobber in there to be on the goal line, or leave Abdullah in there, to keep the defense on their toes? So I could see an outlook where he does actually get a fair amount of goal line and red zone touches, but just as likely, you never know what coaches are going to do. Zach Zenner could lead the team this year with 16 goal line carries.
Yeah, and I guess that's the risk reward, and that's why a guy like Abdullah is going 5th, 6th round, and The potential's definitely there, but there's so many question marks that owners kind of I'll wait, I'll pass on him. But let's talk about Theo Riddick, Alex, and kind of his role. Obviously, he's been a guy that when he's there, catches a ton of passes, super valuable in PPR leagues. If we kind of see Abdullah stay healthy and at least be, maybe he doesn't break out, but has a pretty solid season, maybe he's RB2, RB3 kind of range. Can Riddick still have value in PPR?
Yeah, I certainly think he can have value in PPR. He's just going to be one of those guys that offers you a safe weekly floor, with his 4 to 5 catches and whatever yards. And if he happens to get in the end zone, then fantastic. But I feel like his ceiling is limited, even if, Abdullah gets hurt again or something. We saw it kind of get capped because they won't use Riddick very much between the tackles. It's not where he thrives. But PPR is the format for Riddick, and he's certainly a guy that they want to use him a little more on the slot, and which isn't going to be a huge boost, but it just gets him on the field a little more often, and he's definitely a great later round target in PPR formats.
Yeah, I love him as a second running back in PPR leagues where, especially if you wait on running backs, he's a nice guy to grab late, and like you said, gives you that safe weekly floor. You can pencil him in and get yourself a good amount of points and call it a day. Damian, what about you? Are you in on Theo Riddick in this offense?
Yeah, I love him in full point PPR. I think there's still that hesitation, not in kind of your super competitive leagues, but I do think that kind of the general public still feels weird about taking a running back that, is going to get at most 6 carries a game. It just feels weird slotting him in that running back position. But, we're talking about a guy that was on pace to catch 80 passes last year. There's not that many receivers that are going to catch 80 passes. So I think if you're getting a point for all of those, and it's not like he's only catching, 3-4 yard dump offs. I think he's a guy that's going to be around 8-9 yards per catch. If things go well, and the fact that they are going to target that him in the red zone will kind of help, compensate for the fact that he's not going to be receiving a lot of carries. So he's definitely not going to have the upside of, some of the other guys that you could take kind of in this range, whether it's Tevin Coleman if Freeman goes down or Paul Perkins or something like that. But if it's full point PPR, I think having a guy that you can pencil in for, 10 points every week is really underrated.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely with you there. Let's talk about the receivers in Detroit, and we'll start with Golden Tate. Alex, it was a little slow for him coming out of the gate. Obviously, they were trying to get Marvin Jones going. But, with Golden Tate kind of taking off the way he did, do you think, he'll be that primary guy, a guy that can see, 140-ish targets, maybe catches 100-plus balls, and is a real fantasy difference maker this season?
I don't know if I'd say fantasy difference maker unless we're talking about PPR formats, because he's been pretty consistent in his 3 years in Detroit with or without Calvin Johnson. He's seen around 130-ish targets. He's caught 90-plus passes, and 2 of the 3 years he's had over 1,000 yards. So I think he's kind of like he's a nice, safe middle-round pick. If you're in a standard league, he's kind of in that run where like Larry Fitzgerald is going as well. The guys that you think that you feel their ceiling is a little capped, but they're going to be consistent contributors. I kind of feel like that's who Golden Tate is right now. We know who he is at this point in his career. I think the Lions know who he is, and I don't foresee much changing for him in this offense.
Damian, is that kind of where you are with Golden Tate? He's super safe. He'll get you his 90-something catches, maybe around 1,000 yards, and in PPR leagues, that's incredibly valuable.
Yeah, I mean, he's like you said, he's gonna get that boost in PPR because he is a guy that works underneath a lot, and he catches a lot of passes near around the line of scrimmage. So if you're getting those catch points, it's definitely worth it. But he doesn't have necessarily that red zone upside or that big play upside. But I think if you're buying into Stafford, if you're buying into this offense, I think he's somebody that I think is kind of it's a low end wide receiver too. I think he's generally going in kind of the mid-20s somewhere around there, and I think that's the right spot for him.
Yeah, a good guy to pair. Maybe you get a little more risky at receiver earlier in your draft, kind of give you that safety, that weekly floor. What about Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay, Alex? Are either of these guys, kind of interesting to you in PPR or even in standard leagues?
I mean, depending on the price, especially Jones, I think he's still kind of flirting at an area where I'm not as comfortable taking him. I'd rather get guys in his range, like maybe an Adam Thielen or a Kenny Britt or somebody. And Kenny Golladay in deeper leagues, I'm certainly cool with taking a late round stab at him. The reports out of camp have been great. He was a guy that a lot of people liked coming out of college, and the Lions didn't make a small investment in him when they took him. I think in the 3rd round there. That's a sign that they want this kid to play soon, and I think he could. So in deeper leagues, I'm okay with taking a shot at him, but I'm kind of off the Marvin Jones train right now. There's just too many other receivers in his range that I'd rather take than him.
Do you think Galladay slides into that Anquan Bolden role this year, or do you think that's maybe they give Eric Ebron a little more shot kind of as that big guy, especially when they get in close?
I mean, I think that's going to go more to Ebron. Anquan Bolden was kind of playing a hybrid tight end role for them at times last year, lining up a lot in the slot and tight to the line of scrimmage. So I would think with the talks they have and them taking Ebron's option on his rookie contract, keeping him for another year, and how he has progressed as a player in each of his first 3 seasons, I would envision that more of that role going to him than a player like Galladay, who they'd probably want his size and athleticism more on the outside.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. Damian, Marvin Jones, Kenny Galladay, are you targeting either of these guys in upcoming drafts?
No, not particularly. I mean, Jones, he's a talented guy, but you're just never going to get consistency with him. I don't think it's going to be as crazy as last year, where he was getting 150 yards and 2 touchdowns for the first 4 weeks and then, 2 for 21 the next 5 weeks. I think it'll be a little bit, where the highs won't be as high and the lows won't be as low. But at the same time, I don't think this is going to be an offense that's, going to support, 3 or 4 guys giving you consistent production. I think aside from Tate, it's kind of going to bounce around between the other guys. And we'll see if it can be Ebron. I've been in on Ebron in the past. The fact that he played an entire season last year and didn't catch a single touchdown is just really alarming. I don't know if
I thought he had one. Didn't he have one last
year?
He did.
It was a tight end. It was the tight end sweep. It wasn't a passing. It wasn't. It was
they gave him the receiving touchdown, so we'll give him one. But I think your point is largely valid. It's, in terms of touchdown potential.
Yeah,
I mean,
he did catch one and he ran one in. He and Kobe Fleener with their stupid tight end sweep touchdowns, ruining a lot of fantasy dreams.
Just, I can't even go into that.
we can't go there.
Stop myself before we have to censor the rest of this podcast. But I mean, on the Ebron point, I've heard a lot of people talking about him where it's not like he's a rookie and this is going to be his 4th year now. Where I think if they wanted him, people are saying maybe he's just not a guy that is basically going to be able to make those contested catches, or he's not a guy that's kind of tough enough to go up and get the ball in those contested areas. I don't know if you can make that assessment. You'd probably have to look into the metrics on kind of his contested catch rate and things like that. But I just feel like if they really believed in Ebron, we would have seen at least more opportunity for him in the red zone up until now. They had the whole Joseph Fourier thing a few years back. So you never know what the Lions are doing, but I'd be a little hesitant about expecting, 8 touchdowns from Ebron this year.
Yeah, Alex, I mean, he's going basically as a top 12 tight end, kind of in the Zach Ertz, Jack Doyle range. Is he a guy that when you're heading into drafts, you're comfortable taking, maybe he has that kind of back end of the top 5 upside, or do you just think it's capped because of his touchdown lack of production?
I don't think he's got back end of the top 5 upside, just because there is a pretty elite crop of guys at the top there that if they all stay healthy are going to fill out that top 5 to 6. But I like taking Ebron as a later round option, like him and Jack Doyle, like you said, because I think there is, like you said, they hasn't been used a lot there, but I think there's a lot more opportunity now. Anquan Bolden had 22 targets in the red zone last year, and those are now up for grabs. So not that Ebron's going to assume all of those, but even if he gets 5 or 6 more looks, in the red zone, he could fall into 4 to 6 touchdowns, and if he can even out with another 700 yards like he had last year and 5 to 6 touchdowns, that's top 12 tight end numbers right there. So I'll take him in that late range. And worst case scenario, I'll just stream tight ends because there's a lot of other guys that'll be on the waiver wire. They'll have good matchups like Cameron Brate or Zach Miller even, or David Njoku in Cleveland.
Yeah, no, and that's, I don't know, those are the guys. I'd rather target Jack Doyle. I'd rather target Zach Ertz. I'd rather target Cameron Brate, the aforementioned Kobe Fleener. Those are all guys. I was just looking through his red zone targets, and he had 8, 6, and 6. It's a guy that when they get in close, they don't even really look in his direction. And those could come in year 4. And obviously, like we hit on earlier, tight ends take longer to kind of develop and come along. But I worry about the looks when they get in close. And if we expect Abdullah to kind of be a thing, and they obviously use Theo Riddick, and I have a hard time kind of taking him there. Damian, what about you?
Yeah, I just think there's a lot of questions. I mean, tight end as a whole, it's a position that I think you can never really fully figure out because it's almost a little bit like closers in baseball. I think you know there's the case to be made against taking Gronk or Kelsey kind of that early in the draft where you're really sacrificing some upside, with receivers or running backs that you could take. But at the same time, there's always going to be the tight ends that emerge on the waiver wire that at the end of the season people are going to say, well, this is why you don't draft him early. You could have just had this guy or this guy or this guy. But the problem is that it's not that obvious who that guy is. And if you pick up the wrong guy and then you pick up the wrong guy the next week and it takes you 3 tries to get a tight end, now you've burned 70% of your fab trying to find a tight end streamer. So I still haven't really decided how I'm going to approach this position. I think right now I'm still leaning towards taking a Martellus Bennett, a Jack Doyle, somebody in that range. I really like Austin Hooper. Late. So we'll see. But I think Ebron's going to be a guy that I don't mind taking, but I'm not going to reach for him expecting that big breakout this season.
Alex, and when you're kind of drafting tight ends in general, do you want to make sure you get one of those high upside, one of the Kelseys, the Gronks, the Jordan Reeds, or are you comfortable, kind of just waiting and grabbing, whoever you like of kind of of what's left?
I'm typically of the mind where I'd rather wait and get the best of what's left. I think there's a lot of good guys flirting in that range, and like I said, if you pay attention enough, it's not too hard to stream tight ends, and especially because, like I said, 700 yards and 5 touchdowns for the season-long numbers is basically top 12 tight end play. That's not a lot on a week-to-week basis. You can easily Frankenstein, tight end one-level production, just scooping up guys off the waiver wire here and there. And I tend to find that when I do draft a tight end early, I get more frustrated with how my team composition looks like because I push, getting those running backs and wide receivers that I'd like back around, and then I'm looking at these guys and I'm missing out on that 3rd to 5th round guy that I would have otherwise had, and I don't like my roster nearly as much as when I wait on the position.
No, and that makes a ton of sense. And, for those out there that, if you typically take tight end early, go do some mock drafts. Take a look at how your team shakes out when you take a tight end early. Take a look at how it shakes out when you take one late, and see what you think. You might be a person that's more comfortable having, Kelsey as your tight end, knowing you have that week-to-week safety and having to mess with it. But like Alex said, there's enough potential between streaming and just hitting a gem off the waiver wire that, you can kind of work that in and get enough fantasy production from your tight end while still, crushing those early rounds with receivers and running backs. Let's shift our focus and we'll talk about those Green Bay Packers, and we'll start under center with Aaron Rodgers. Alex, is he your quarterback one heading into this season?
Always. He's my quarterback one every year. In his sky was falling 2015 season, when everybody was wondering what was wrong with him and was the magic gone and was the offense broken, he still finished the quarterback 8th overall. And every other year he's played, at least 15 games, he's been the QB1 or QB2. That's just unmatched consistency. He's the greatest. He's the QB1. Anybody that says otherwise is fooling themselves.
Damian, do you want to argue for your boy Brady?
A little bit, but I don't know. I think, if I had to put odds on it, I still think Rodgers is probably the number one guy, because I do think you have to account for the fact that he's going to give you rushing production that, Brady or Breeze is never going to give you. I guess my only issue is I think if I can get Brady, 15 picks later and get an extra pick in that round where Rodgers is going, then I think I'm willing to do that. I've seen it happen in some of the MFLs here. I think if they're going a few picks apart, then, Rodgers is the guy I would have. But I can see a case for Brady just because I think the Pats are going to throw so much this year with kind of Burkhead and James White. It just seems like they're going to go through that thing where, instead of running it, for 3 or 4 yards, they're just going to throw those passes. And I could really see a big season coming from Brady, especially given the fact that, he's a guy that never really has a lot of turnovers, so you don't have to worry about losing those interception points. And with kind of the array of weapons they have this year, it could be something similar to what we saw in 2007 in terms of total offensive output.
Yeah, I think that's definitely in the cards. Now, Alex, Aaron Rodgers is going in the 3rd round. I think it's pretty safe to say that we all probably wouldn't draft him there. But at what point during your draft, if Aaron Rodgers is falling, if you're in a league with people who tend to wait on quarterbacks, what point are you like, yeah, I'm comfortable taking him here. I've got enough other stuff wherein I can figure out the rest later.
Usually it's maybe round 5 where I'd start considering Aaron Rodgers, even in a standard league or anything like that. It just becomes a matter of like if I've got a couple good running backs and a couple good wide receivers, I certainly wouldn't mind stacking up Rodgers with that group. But just in general, as much as I love Aaron Rodgers and I say he's the quarterback one, I always wait on a quarterback in drafts. I'd just much rather load up at those other more injury-prone positions and take one of the value guys later.
Yep, 100%. And usually there's at least a couple people in your league that are way more eager to take quarterback than I am. So I'm like you. I rarely get them, but yeah, I think back of the 5th, early 6th I'd be okay taking him there. But that's probably it. Damian, what about you? Are you comfortable taking a quarterback earlier, or do you kind of want to? I guess what round are you thinking? Okay, now I'll take an elite quarterback.
No, I've always waited. I had one year a couple seasons ago where I basically ended up with 3 quarterbacks that were all starters, but nobody ever wants a quarterback, so I couldn't trade any of them. And ever since that, I decided I'm not going to bother. Like I said, the other positions, like Alex said, get hurt a lot more. There's a lot more volatility in terms of guys coming in and out. Just take as many lottery tickets as you can, with your running backs and your receivers. And you're always going to be able to find, unless it's a super flex league or, something like a 16-team league, you're always going to be able to find a guy. We talked about Dalton. We talked about Tyrod Taylor. They're not Aaron Rodgers, but I think the opportunity you afford yourself, by waiting 5, 6, 7 rounds and using those picks on other positions, I think it's, it's plus EV, as they say.
Yeah, I'd much rather have, say Doug Baldwin or Brandon Cooks or DeAndre Hopkins, whoever you like, and, and Andy Dalton than taking Aaron Rodgers and going, I'll take Kevin White or Zay Jones or Ted Ginn. Like, give me the elite, skill guy and a good quarterback that'll get the job done. Alex, let's talk about Ty Montgomery. Obviously, the Packers brought in Jamal Williams. They brought in Aaron Jones. But, Montgomery seems like a guy that in this offense, the unique ways they kind of line everybody up, has a ton of upside. Are you on board with him kind of in that 4th, 5th round range where he's going? And is he a guy you're kind of excited about this season?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm getting a little probably too hyper on Ty Montgomery, just envisioning the ceiling he could achieve in that offense. I know they drafted 3 running backs, and everybody's made a big stink out of that, but if they really wanted somebody to take over the job from Ty Montgomery, they would have drafted somebody ahead earlier than the 4th round.
Yeah.
Not saying that Jamal Williams can't win it out if he plays better in camp in the preseason, but that's kind of a sign to me with the way a lot of these teams have operated over the years, that they want Montgomery to be the guy. The only knock that he really has in his game right now is that he isn't as good at pass protection, but he's got all camp. He's working with Brandon Jackson right now to get that up. And his ceiling, I have him as I think I have him as a top 10 running back right now in fantasy, just because with his ability as a pass catcher and his potential, I think he's got a higher ceiling, and I'd rather take the risk on him over guys with a lot of question marks in that range that once you get out of the top 10, like Leonard Fournette and Todd Gurley and Marshawn Lynch and things like that. So I'm all in on Montgomery this year. I think we saw the flashes last year. I think he's an incredibly capable runner. And, Eddie Lacy, even with James Stark stealing about 100 carries, was the RB6 in this offense for a couple years in a row there. So I think that's well within Ty Montgomery's range of outcomes.
I love it. I'm 100% in agreement with you. I have Montgomery as my RB10 in PPR. I think, the Jamal Williams, Aaron Jones combo, if, Montgomery were to go down, would make more sense. I think Jamal Williams can be a nice complementary piece to Montgomery, but I'm with you. I don't think he's, in serious danger of having his job taken away from him. Damian, what about you? Are you going to throw some cold water onto this, or are you going to stoke the fire?
No, it's a clean sweep. I think the same way we talked about how we don't want we don't want players on bad offenses. We talked about Jordan Howard. We said, hey, he's a great player, but he's just not going to have the chances. This is the exact opposite. When it comes to the Packers, the Patriots, the Saints, if you think a guy has some talent, you want to, and he's in those offenses, take the flyer, because even, the opportunity might not be as great. He's not going to be a 20 touch guy, but it's like they say, would you rather have 130 targets from a bad quarterback or 90 targets from Aaron Rodgers? And it kind of goes the same way for this whole offense in terms of the opportunity he's going to have, just because teams are going to be worried about the passing game, and the fact that being a receiver basically up until last season, he does have that theoretic ability where he can give you 5 for 50 every game in addition to 12 to 15 carries. And if he becomes their primary red zone guy, I think that he can certainly be a top 10 running back.
Yeah, I guess my biggest concern is that pass pro. Obviously, they brought in John Kuhn in a lot of spots last year when Rodgers would get frustrated when he's chucking it all over the yard. But, if he improves that this offseason, I think the sky's the limit. And
just go 5 wide. Just split him out.
Yeah.
And then put him in the slot, and it's like there's not a linebacker that's going to cover him, especially a middle linebacker.
God, I can't wait. I'm very, very excited. Alex, are you is the third round kind of the range where you start really considering Montgomery?
Yeah, again, it might depend on how my draft goes, but I know that if I don't take him then, I'm probably not going to get him, especially if I'm drafting with other people that are high on him. So it's one of those get your guy cases, and I'd rather be around early on Ty Montgomery and enjoy or suffer through the ride with him than be around late and watch somebody else reap the benefits of a top 10 running back season from him.
Absolutely. Third round. I'm very comfortable taking him there. Let's talk pass catchers, and we'll start with my boy Jordy Nelson. One of my favorite receivers to watch. Obviously, the knee injury was a huge blow to his 2015, but this guy is 1,300 yards, 1,500 yards, 1,250, 8, 13, 14 touchdowns. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers' dude. Has down the field skills. I know there was some talk of him kind of slowing down a little bit, but I think he was obviously he's missed the whole year due to knee injury. I think it still took him a while to kind of get his bearings, get his stuff going, and 1,250, 14 touchdowns. Alex, is this a guy that you think can still be a wide receiver one and in PPR leagues you're comfortable taking him kind of at the back end of the first, early second?
Yeah, absolutely. When when the offseason first started and I was trying to put together rankings and looking at draft position and seeing Jordy Nelson going as about the wide receiver 6, I was like, man, that feels like it might be a little too high. But then, I thought on it and I looked back at the numbers and the tape, and I know from Next Gen Stats that Jordy Nelson's yards of separation increased later in the season as he got healthier and got more strength on that knee. And then you just know, like you mentioned it, his mind meld with Aaron Rodgers. Like those two have a connection, especially in the red zone, where since 2013, Jordy Nelson commands roughly 30% of all of Aaron Rodgers' red zone targets, which is an obscenely high number. But then if you take the last 3 full seasons Jordy Nelson has played with Aaron Rodgers, he's averaged 88 catches, 1,300 yards, and 14 touchdowns across 3 seasons. Now, that's a high bar to hit again. Yeah. But, I mean, with Jordy, you should get for sure 1,000 yards and double-digit touchdowns, which is just absolutely something you can't avoid as a wide receiver one. And I'm totally in on him at his draft price, and I think he'll be great again this year.
So is he your you said receiver 6 for you?
I think, yeah, he's right behind the big 3, and then A.J. Green and Mike Evans for now.
Yeah, he's right behind A.J. Green for me. He's number 5. I'm definitely a big fan. Damian, what about you? Are you in on Jordy this year?
Yep, I think I do think he's a little bit of a different player now. It's kind of the combination of the injury and the fact that he is in his 30s. I don't think we're going to see the Jordy we saw 2 years ago where it was 50, 60-yard plays every week, and we're not going to get the 180-yard game with 2 scores. But the floor is just he might have the highest floor of any receiver really when you consider the fact that Julio has the injury question. Same thing with AJ Green, but a bad game for Jordy is like 5 for 60. Which you're never going to lose your week because your number one receiver gives you 5 for 60. It's a problem when you kind of get when you get the Dez like 2 for 17 because the Cowboys don't throw him the ball or something like that. So in a game where it's not baseball. It's not rotisserie scoring. You don't get to just add up all the stats at the end of the year. You need production every week. It's really nice to be able to have that guy that is not going to lose the week for you, even if he's not going to give you a 40-point game anymore.
Yep, and he's in that high-powered offense. He's in catching passes from the best quarterback in the NFL. There's definitely a lot to like about Jordy Nelson. Now, opposite Jordy is a huge question mark for me, Alex, and I'm hoping you can clear it up. Davante Adams. This is a guy that obviously last year, 12 touchdowns, basically 1,000 yards. Was a league winner for a lot of people. Guy went really late, but the previous 2 seasons had 800 yards combined and 4 touchdowns. Currently going kind of in that 3rd, 4th round range. Talk to me about Davante Adams. Like, what are you envisioning kind of for him this season?
I mean, I think in that 3rd, 4th round range, he's being a little overvalued. I think that's kind of people reaching for him at his ceiling again that aren't considering the other people that are going to be commanding targets in this offense, because Adams scored 7 of his 12 touchdowns in the red zone. He got about 20% of the looks there. Randall Cobb, while he played in 13 games, I think it was the total, he had so many injuries last year that didn't keep him out. They kept him in but didn't play as much. As you guys know, he had his hamstring, his ankle, his back, his neck. Like, there were a lot of things dogging him. And when he's been fully healthy, he's gotten over 20% of Aaron Rodgers' red zone looks too. So when you factor in that, and then you factor in the additions of Martellus Bennett and Lance Kendricks, and the Packers probably running more 2 tight end sets, is it always going to be Adams? Is Cobb going to come in on some of those? Like, how are those snaps going to be divvied up? I think Adams can still have a good year, but man, the wide receiver 19 price tag in the 4th round for him right now is a little crazy for me.
Yeah, there's no chance I'm touching him there. Like, I think Davante Adams is just going to be one of those players I just don't have. I don't see it. I mean, we've seen 3 years of production. Even last year when he was, having his best season, he still couldn't get to quite 1,000 yards. There's something there holding me back. And, maybe if he starts falling and people are kind of come off him a little bit. But I think Cobb's the guy that interests me most of, guys beyond Jordy. You mentioned all those injuries. If he's healthy, can he kind of, regain his old form, and maybe Davante Adams becomes kind of the 3rd option behind Jordy and Randall Cobb?
I mean, I wish I knew I had more concrete answers to these things. I certainly think we all believe that can happen. I mean, we saw it in the playoffs when Cobb was healthy out there and caught the Hail Mary and caught a bunch of other passes. And, Rodgers said after the game that we're better when 18's on the field. I think he truly believes that. And Aaron Rodgers has always said his favorite receiver is the open receiver. So whoever's getting open is going to be getting the ball. But right now, when you look at fantasy draft price, Cobb comes at a much better value. I mean, there are certainly concerns. He hasn't been healthy in a while. If Adams continues his ascension, like, he could steal some more looks. But if I'm buying one of these guys, I'm definitely buying Cobb at his 10th, 11th round price tag instead of Adams.
Yep, 100% in agreement. Damian, what about you? Where are you at with Davante Adams?
It's tough because I don't love the player. I think it's hard to recover from, the year Jordy got hurt, where all of a sudden we thought Adams was going to get like 1,500 yards and 12 touchdowns because he was playing with Aaron Rodgers, and he was productive in college, and he went on to, I think, put up like literally the worst wide receiver season of all time in terms of like actual advanced metrics in his route running and his catch percentage and things like that. But they kept sticking with him because, whether it was the fact that they absolutely, I think they hate Jeff Janis more than Sean Payton hates Mark Ingram. So that's tough to get over that. But I guess if you have him, I mean, I just took him in an MFL as the 25th receiver. I think that's kind of right about where I feel okay with it. I'm still going to take guys like, I think they'll take, Terrell Pryor, Alshon Jeffrey, Stephon Diggs. I'll take those guys ahead of him, Michael Crabtree. But once you kind of get past them and, you're looking at some of these other receivers, I think actually Willie Snead's a guy that maybe is jumping up that I think could see, going there. But then when you're kind of get into like the Dante Moncrief and the Tyreek Hill and stuff like that, I think at that point you almost just trust the fact that he's getting his targets from Aaron Rodgers and the Packers are going to put up points. And he does kind of have the size that Randall Cobb doesn't in terms of being a red zone target, especially since, again, it could have been because of the injuries, but Cobb just didn't look like his same explosive self in terms of getting separation underneath last year like he has in the past. So I don't think we're going to see anything more from Davante Adams, but again, I do think he offers a pretty decent floor given kind of the other players going around him.
Yeah. Like I said, probably going to be a guy I just don't end up with because I think someone else is going to want him more. Let's talk about that Martellus Bennett component, Alex. Obviously, we've seen, Jared Cook had a decent season and flashed at points last year. Richard Rodgers has had moments. They've never had that one tight end that's been super consistent for a whole season. Do you think Bennett can be that guy and kind of have a legit role in this offense on a week-to-week basis?
I mean, I think that's certainly the hope. We saw it in flashes with Cook, as you said. We know Jermichael Finley kind of had that role years ago. As far as like fantasy goes for Martellus Bennett, it does concern me a little bit that Lance Kendricks is also there and Richard Rodgers is there, and we know both of those guys can play. Not to the level of Martellus Bennett, but they're also not going to be guys that Aaron Rodgers is certainly going to ignore in the passing game. But I really like Martellus Bennett. I think he's a fine later-round tight end. I'm not quite as hyper on him as some of my colleagues who see him being a top 5 finisher. But I think he's going to be a great fit for the Packers, and I'm excited to see what they do with him.
Would you take him over Eric Ebron?
Yes, I would take him over Eric Ebron.
Yeah, I think I'm on board with that. Damian, what about you?
Yeah, I just like the offensive situation more. We'll see. I think, it's a little bit like the whole Jared Cook thing, where we thought kind of once Aaron Rodgers gets this big athletic tight end, the sky is the limit. But there are a lot of kind of moving pieces in this offense, a lot of mouths to feed, and he has had some injury questions. So he's certainly worth taking a flyer, but I think you do have to get him. I'm certainly not going to be taking him, earlier than the 11th or 12th tight end off the board.
Yeah, I think he's a much better football player than Jared Cook, and obviously, as long as he's healthy, I think can be more reliable. I guess I would say I'm closer to him, having that top 5 upside than where you guys are, but I definitely like him, and if he falls to me, I'll be very, very happy. Let's finish up with those Minnesota Vikings, and there's actually a lot of fantasy potential on this offense. We saw it last year with Stephon Diggs, with Adam Thielen. Obviously, Kyle Rudolph was really good among tight ends. Let's start with the running back situation, Alex. And, obviously they paid Latavius Murray to come in, but he's already dealing with issues. They took Dalvin Cook early. I guess, what's your initial read of the kind of the backfield landscape, and, who are you most interested in for fantasy purposes?
I'm most interested in Dalvin Cook for fantasy purposes. I had zero interest in Latavius Murray, even when he was going to be their main back before they drafted Cook. I just didn't want him behind that offensive line, even though they tried to make some additions. But I think they took Cook in the second round for a reason. They don't have a lot of money tied to Latavius Murray, so there isn't, a ton of incentive to give him the ball a bunch. And as much as we like Jerick McKinnon and all of his measurables, we've seen this experiment play out a couple times in Minnesota, and it hasn't ended well. So if there's one fantasy back I want out of that group, it's Dalvin Cook. I think right now in my rankings, I have him around the RB early 20s. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he's in the low 20s in terms of overall rankings for standard leagues, and I'd be happy to take him, like we were saying, kind of in that Ameer Abdullah range, stretching for a couple rounds. If I can get Dalvin Cook in, maybe round 6 or even round 5 or whatever, depending on how the board falls, I'd be pretty happy with that.
Yeah, I'm a huge Dalvin Cook guy this year. Like, I think, I don't think Latavius is very good. Obviously, I could see Zimmer kind of being stubborn a little bit early and letting Latavius kind of being the guy for the first couple games. But I think Dalvin Cook has a ton of potential in this offense. I think he could really take off. Like, if you tell me that in the season he's like a top 15, top 20 type running back, I wouldn't be shocked at all. And he might even actually be my favorite of the rookies. I'd rather take him than, especially given his price tag, than Leonard Fournette, than Joe Mixon. I just think there's a lot of potential, and I think there's a lot less to worry about, around him. Damian, what about you? Are you in on Dalvin?
It depends on the price. I took him as my RB2 in the Scott Fish Bowl. So I definitely, have high hopes for him. But I think, it started out, even, I want to say 2-3 weeks ago, where you could easily get him outside the top 20, at which point he was certainly kind of my favorite player in that area, just because we know he's a talented guy. We saw what he did in college, and the path to him becoming a full-time running back, right from the start, was pretty probable. But when you have to pay, assuming that it's already happened, I think it's a little bit tougher. I think my concern with the Vikings is that I think that offensive line is just terrible. I think they've been floating that stat around where Adrian Peterson, like, it was zero point 0.8 yards before contact on carries
Yeah.
last year. I mean, the guy couldn't do anything. So I don't think, hopefully they're going to be a little bit better, but I don't think, they're going to turn into the Cowboys or anything. So it could be a little bit tough. They're not exactly a vertical offense. I think Sam Bradford would much rather throw a 6 yard out to Kyle Rudolph than, throw 20 yards downfield. So I don't know how much explosion we're going to see in this offense, but I definitely, I don't think Murray's going to be much of an obstacle. And I would certainly take my chance, assuming I don't have to, take him inside the top, say, 15 to 18 running backs.
Yeah, I know, like, at Florida State, he had a questionable offensive line and was still able to make plays. Obviously, that's college. Those guys aren't quite as athletic as NFL players, but it was good to see. His ADP is rising, though. I mean, mid-July, we're talking about a early 6th-round pick. Now he's a late 4th-round pick. Alex, if he keeps climbing, to that kind of mid-4th round or early 4th round range, is that going to be a point where you're like, I'm out on him, or are you comfortable taking him there?
Yeah, that's probably a no-go for me if he's climbing that high. I'd rather take my shots on some of the other value potential RB1s hanging around in those rounds a few rounds later.
Yeah. I'd probably still take him there, but that's really, really close, and it would kind of depend on the other running backs that are sitting there and whatnot. Let's talk about the pass catchers, and we'll start with Stephon Diggs. Obviously, in the games he played, what was really good. Alex, do you think he's a PPR monster, worthy of kind of top 20-ish consideration, or do you think he's kind of getting overdrafted and he has Sam Bradford as his quarterback?
No, I think Diggs is set to break out this year, even in standard. I mean, he played 13 games last year and was just about at 1,000 yards. I think he had like 82 catches, and most of those games were while he was playing through a groin injury too. That like really sapped, I think, his ability and changed how they used him. Part of that was the offensive switch from Norv Turner to Pat Shurmur, excuse me. But I think I've been reports early in camp so far that they've been sending Diggs deep a lot more. He's still moving all over the field, and I just think he burst onto the national scene in a big way when he whooped the Packers for nearly 200 yards and a touchdown in that Monday or Sunday night game. I can't remember which one it was. I'm trying to black it out. But I think he's a great guy. I have him in my low 20s for wide receiver also, and I'm honestly not too worried about this Sam Bradford passing attack. I mean, we have to remember, as maligned as this guy has been for falling apart, he was the number 1 overall pick for a reason, and he still did put together a pretty good season last year. Granted, a lot of that was on the shorter passes, but if he has a healthy Diggs, a healthy Thielen, Laquan Treadwell doing literally anything on the field, I mean, he could put together a pretty nice season.
Yeah, I'm really hoping Treadwell actually becomes something. I have a lot of Dynasty shares that are hoping for that. Do you think we could see a Golden Tate type season from Diggs where he's 90-something catches and around 1,000 yards?
Oh, easily. I would expect him to hit 90 catches, no problem, and over 1,000 yards. The touchdowns are going to be the question with Kyle Rudolph being such a red zone, a vacuum around the red zone for targets.
Damian, what about you? Where are you at with Diggs?
It's tough because I don't like Sam Bradford, and I don't really like this Vikings offense, but I do like Diggs, so I guess you got to find a middle ground somewhere. If he can stay healthy, I do think this is a guy that has the talent to be a number 1 wide receiver, and I don't think I like Thielen. I think he's a guy that has a good price point right now in terms of consistency. Again, he's a guy that I think, aside from that late season, blowout against the Packers where he had 200 yards or something. He didn't really have the big flashy game, so people overlooked him, but he was always good for, 4 for 55, something like that, which doesn't sound like much, but again, I'm kind of talking about the floor you need in these weekly matchups we have in fantasy. So I think Diggs, I think his touchdown upside and maybe his yardage is going to be capped a little bit by the fact that they just don't throw the ball downfield much, but he's clearly the most talented receiver in this offense, and if he can stay healthy, You know, 90 catches is certainly something that's plausible, and if that's 1,100, 1,200 yards and 6, 7 touchdowns, I definitely think that's going to make him worth his price tag right now in terms of ADP.
Yeah. And Alex, in terms of Thielen going in, the middle of the 10th round, is he a guy that if you're looking to add a little wide receiver depth later in your draft, you're comfortable taking there?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of Thielen, grabbing him later in drafts. I kind of have a suspicion that this Vikings passing attack could really kind of surprise some people this year. And Thielen's a guy that I think I might have mentioned him earlier. I'd rather grab him than some of the other guys. Like him and Kenny Britt are two guys that I'm a big fan of taking in the later rounds.
Yeah, I like Kenny Britt quite a bit, and especially if you're looking for a little more safety later in your draft, I think both those names are great targets. What about Kyle Rudolph? Alex obviously had that big became a touchdown guy. Sam Bradford looked to him when they got close. Are you comfortable taking him kind of in the back end of that, top 10, top 12, and he's currently going off the board in the 8th round, right after Martellus Bennett. Is Rudolph a guy that you think maybe can produce a similar type season again this year?
Yeah, he might fall back a little bit, but I think he's one of those safe guys to take as one of the back end tight end ones, and that's exactly what he'll give you. I don't know that he's going to be able to finish in the top 5 or anything, and nor do I think he's going to all of a sudden plummet and fall off the face of the map. I just think he kind of is what he is, and in this offense we know about what his target share is going to be. We know he's going to get a handful of touchdowns, and you'll get, tight end 8 to 12 production out of Rudolph, pretty much guaranteed.
Do you like Martellus Bennett or Kyle Rudolph more?
I think I'd take Rudolph over Bennett.
Ooh, yeah.
But it's close.
Yeah, it's real close. I think I like Bennett more, but yeah, I mean, both those guys are definitely good to target, as those double-digit rounds start. Damian, what about you? Where are you at with Kyle Rudolph and, kind of expectations for him this year?
I definitely think he has, one of the highest floors in terms of once we get past, Gronk and Kelsey and Olsen and kind of that top tier. But I also don't think he's got much upside in terms of I don't think he makes a lot of plays down the field. I think he's like the king of the basically 1-yard play action touchdown where you just put in like 7 linemen, roll out to the right, and he's standing in the back of the end zone, which, it's worth 6 points, but it's kind of tough when your tight end scores, a touchdown and gets you 8 points that week. So yeah. I think that's kind of the Kyle Rudolph stat line special. So I'm probably, and with kind of the season he had, I think he has gotten pushed up a little bit, inside that top 10 where, he's going at a point that I just don't think I'm going to invest. I think I'm just going to wait and I'm going to grab, whether it's Hunter Henry or Martellus Bennett or Jack Doyle, one of those guys that I think has comparable upside, but you can get a few rounds later.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. Obviously, once those double-digit rounds start, then I kind of start thinking about tight end. But yeah, I'll wait as long as I can and grab whoever happens to be sitting there. Well, Alex, this was a lot of fun. Really appreciate you taking some time and joining us. Tell everybody where they can check out the pod and read all your work and follow you on Twitter and all that good stuff.
Sure thing. It's the NFL Fantasy Live podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes or NFL.com/podcast. I'm on Twitter and most social media at Alex Gelhar, Gelhar, and to find all my writing, NFL.com/fantasy or /Gelhar will take you right to my writer page. And it's been a lot of fun, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. The Fantasy Live is one of my favorite football fantasy podcasts to check out, so we really appreciate you taking some time and joining us tonight. For Damian Dabrowski, I'm Kyle Robert, and we'll talk to you guys next time.